Gentlemen, here we go. If you're a leader looking for maybe an unconventional way or an effective way to grow your business, and you're going to want to pay attention to this episode, we got a good one for you. Let's get this one going. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life. Prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Bros.
Are you a CEO, business owner, or leader searching for unconventional methods to achieve success and drive your organization forward? And look no further. Our guest today is a renowned CEO, consultant, and researcher who has spent over 35 years delving into the complexities of leadership and uncovering the keys to building a thriving business. With his vast experience and unique approach, he has revolutionized the way leaders think and act, enabling them to overcome common challenges and achieve remarkable results. So get ready to gain value and insight and challenge the status quo with this incredible man, Mr. Don Schmincke. Don, welcome to the program, my friend.
Thank you. I haven't got
hope
such
you
an
enjoy the
energetic
intro.
introduction.
Man, it's a good time. It's always a party when you get to the Business Bros Spotlight. All right, let's do this thing. We got people on Facebook going Business Bros because you know how corny we are when we do that sort of stuff. All right, leadership. Don, you've been in this space for quite some time. What are some common maybe failures and pitfalls that CEOs and leaders face when it comes to like their management approach? How can they avoid it? And also like, how did you even get here to this point where you're focusing on leadership?
That's a good question. I almost dropped out of high school, and I was told that I needed to finish my senior year, so I was a little bit disturbed because I just found it was boring. But in a few months, I finished my entire senior year, and I ended up going to working at my uncle's gas station. I was in rock bands. I was trying to be cool. I'm still trying to be cool, but it's not working very well. And I ended up. Oh, thank you. And so I went to a community college because I noticed that people driving the nice cars were having educations, and that's where things really sort of took off. They didn't care whether I showed up or not, and I was having a fun time learning things. And this is in the early days when the computers were just starting, and I took various courses in various areas. But a couple of people there have been at Cambridge, and like a physics professor from MIT, and I had a student activities director who came into BU, and her husband's MIT, and they said I should apply. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what MIT was. I thought it was a trade school or something. And so I said, okay. And they put me through that, I don't know, grueling battery of testings. And so I guess they saw something in me, because next thing you know is I'm in MIT. And then I took off into various areas. I just loved learning and exploring. So I got into planetary physics. I got into, nuclear missile guidance system designs. I got into automating, the Harvard MIT biomedical lab. And so I really got into studying humans, which is what took me to Hopkins. And so when I was there, I got attached to the executive MBA program, and I started seeing these failure rates of management theories. So I began using a scientific platform to understand why it failed so high. And so that's where I started training CEOs, and I started doing expeditions around the world, and they liked it. I mean, all of a sudden, like I did this book with Oxford University's permission on an ancient samurai program that was used to train leaders 700 years ago. And then that became a bestseller. And so here I am. I've trained about 30,000 CEOs. I've done like 2,000 speeches and workshops, and I'm still learning. I'm still testing new theories, but that's how I got here. So high school dropout in a rock band is now teaching companies how to grow faster.
Going from a high school dropout to working with MIT and that's huge. And I got to ask you this because at the end of the day, there are a lot of students today that are looking at college with not the same without the same, I don't know, expectation, or they're not getting the same out of the education experience that they would 20 years ago. Today you can almost find everything you want online, learn all kinds of things at your own pace, and I kind of feel like that's kind of the struggle that you were going with at the very beginning. You're like, I don't want to be in high school, this stuff is boring, but as soon as they lit a fire under your butt of something that was interesting, like it was hard to get you to stop moving forward. If you could tell young people who are about to go into the world and they're feeling that anti-education thing, how important is it to continue their education even if it's not a traditional one?
Well, I think you got to get the basics. I mean, obviously, you've got to get out of high school. You've got to, or get some certification that you've completed something. And then I would say the hardest part for me was finding what I loved. And I kind of still don't know. I'm bouncing around in a dozen different, areas of pursuits, but um, find what you want to do in a way that has so much passion that you want to, you know, live your life just pursuing that. Like I grew up with guys that were like, when I was in college, one guy liked rocks and he just studied geology and he got a job in, the oil industry, is very successful. One guy liked playing the tuba, and he became excellent at the tuba. Um, and I just wish I had that one thing, but I don't. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I have ADHD, so I see a lot of different things, and I want to do a lot of different things. So I think everybody has their own journey, but you have to find, what inspires you. And if you don't know, try a lot of different things. The whole world's out there. You're no longer stuck. I mean, we've got so much going on with AI and various colleges and various other alternative educational sources. I would say never stop learning and growing, because when you do that, now you're kind of stuck and the world's not waiting. The world's not waiting for you to catch up. So,
No, it is not. All right, let's talk about some of the common mistakes. You've trained over 30,000 CEOs, made over 2,000 speeches. You're talking to leaders all day long. What are some of those common failures and pitfalls that you see CEOs face when it comes to their management approaches? How can they avoid them?
well, a lot of times I think is, you try to get the best employees, but a lot of times you stop allowing them to be powerful or listening to them. And I do this a lot in my workshop. It's like, when's the last time you heard about a problem that you could have found out months earlier when it was easy to fix? And my point is that, you got to give people the freedom to tell you what's going on, because I think a lot of fear stops us. And when I do this little exercise when I'm with companies, and I'll say, how much time is really spent in dysfunctional, unproductive behavior? And it was a term that came out of our latest book, High Altitude Leadership, or one of my later books years ago. And it was interesting because we were finding that, dead mountain climbers were clutching their tools, and dead companies are clutching their tools. And what was happening is, like, people aren't, they're letting dysfunction run them. Generally, I find 20 to 80% of the time in a company is dysfunctional. The average is around 50. And now I've done this with, like I said, 30,000 companies. So getting a hold of that is a whole different journey. And it really has to do with getting the ego out of the way, which is why the early samurai research was really important. And I think one of the mistakes we don't talk about is how to we create people that have bravery and honor. And not only that, like, we've got this big happy employee movement going on. And I'm like, you know what? We really need people with us who are willing to suffer and sacrifice. Because if you have a team that's willing to suffer and sacrifice, so they have bravery and honor, I'll put that up against any happy employee team any day of the week. So I know I'm being politically incorrect here, but it's just what I'm seeing when it comes to growing companies.
Is it because people aren't just willing to do some of the hard work? They're feeling like maybe it's entitled. This is what I'm supposed to get versus what I'm giving to get something in return.
When you say entitled, I mean like employee attitudes?
Yeah, yeah. Like I just noticed that like work ethic, I feel maybe it's just because I'm getting older. I don't know, but like everybody looks at the next generation like you guys are way more lax. You guys are way more lax. You know, it's good times creating weak men type of mentality. Do you think that's kind of the issue going on?
It's funny. I heard somebody one day say, "Yeah, everybody feels entitled and like you owe me something until they get a mortgage." And all of a sudden they start joining the team, right? It's like, uh-oh. But I do think there was an episode in my upcoming book, Winners and Losers, forced me to do some research into this in a very deep way. And I got started on this book because I was trying to figure out like why we have so many books on winning. Why aren't there more winners? We have so many books for entrepreneurs. Why don't we have more entrepreneurs? And then went to look at the failure rate of that. And it turned out that great entrepreneurs know how to lose, but we're not teaching losing. So I thought, why don't we start teaching losing? And with the history of knowing how to do that well, people then learn how to grow faster. So you look at like Richard Branson or Elon Musk. I mean, these guys just they've lost and they've learned. And I think Mandela said it. I said he was like, I always win, but what is it? I always win, but never lose. I never lose. I always learn. That's what it was. I never lose. I always learn. We should be teaching that. And I think that helps us continue growing. And so when I did this book, I did look at that entitlement thing. And there was a social experiment disaster on the self-esteem movement that started like, I think back in the 80s, where everybody, nobody's a loser. Everybody's right. We're going to build your self-esteem and we're not going to make you sad. And everybody gets a prize and everybody gets a participation trophy. Oh my God, that was the worst social disaster ever. And all the scientists now that had backed it are now like, oh, that was dumb.
It's a
You
big
know,
oops.
right? I mean, now everybody owes me everything. I do everything right. And it's like, you know what? You're fully prepared for a world that doesn't exist. And because the world that does exist doesn't owe you anything. And so people that get that have more of a chance, I think, of being successful in business than those that think, hey, I'm owed this, because I've been a good boy and girl my whole life and I've always gotten awards. And so I think society is now moving to like try to readdress that. But maybe that's some of the things you're talking about that you're seeing.
Well, let me ask you, because at the end of the day, that became the status quo. Like, that's just the way that generation grew up. I was born in the 80s. That's exactly what ended up happening. A lot of the people feel like they're entitled. That becomes the status quo. So, as you train leaders, how do you challenge them to kind of go against the status quo, to adopt something that may be unconventional, that puts their employees under that kind of stress, that pressure, to help build them and teach them ways of losing, or better said, learning what they need to do to be successful?
Well, I think it's cultural. When I was working with Black Hawk Down, the movie, the book, I was working with Matt Eversman. And what was interesting about working with Black Hawk Down is the military kind of knows that the plan that we make, we're always taught, hey, have a life plan and work the plan. We're never taught your plan's not going to work, and that's how we should teach planning, is it's like you need the plan, but no, it's not going to work because as Matt said in the Black Hawk Down research, is the enemy has a vote and they may vote no. So, so the way to survive and be successful is to adapt constantly. Always be pivoting, always be adapting, always be learning, always be working this out. And a lot of this can be applied. I mean, I've been really grateful and privileged to have a lot of run into some really smart people. Uh, and so I love working. George Stalk as an example. He's a guy that has written a number of Harvard Business Review articles. I ran into George. In fact, we're meeting in a couple of days, and we spent a couple hours together. And I'm really grateful for the time that these brilliant people spend with me. And he just came up with this, a few years ago, but now Harvard published an article on disruption, which is really one of the elements that we're talking about here. using a jet fighter program that was discovered by a guy, Lieutenant Boyd, who's found that using an inferior aircraft in the Korean War against the Russian MiGs, the American aircraft were inferior by almost all measures. Yet there were some pilots that had a 10-to-1 kill ratio. And when they looked at it, was what was going on in the brain. And the reason Harvard and these people are figuring this out is it could apply to business as well. And that's the point. How do you adapt? And it was something called the OODA loop. You can actually look this up on the web, OODA. You can look this up on the web. It stands for, observe. How often do we spend time of just observing what's around us? Then orient is the second word. What does it all mean? What does all those data points mean? And then decide. In other words, what are your potential decisions on what's happening? And then act is the A. And they found that fighter pilots that would do the observe, orient, decide, and act faster in a loop could send then the enemy into a panic. And once the enemy's in a panic, then you could strike. So I think in life itself, do we do enough of observing and orienting and constantly adapting our plans so that we can grow and learn and really take a lead in the areas where we want to? That's what we should be teaching.
I feel like if you look back in some of the bigger companies, the Elon Musk of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world, they had a pretty harsh leadership style, but they were also the ones who were there in the trenches doing the work along with their teams and kind of gained the respect of that of their teams to kind of push that company forward as they were growing. They did it over and over again. And I feel like when you have certain leaders that are driven that way, that expect of their team, that comes into play, it makes a big difference. So how do you help leaders kind of create that culture of continuous improvement and learning so that they can grow their organizations? Because I think that's kind of it's really difficult to change other people, but a good leader kind of does that, right?
Well, yeah, I think it's cultural. I think right now, mostly in the West, it's a little different in the East, but in Western societies, I think we need to stop having meetings where we're just doing news reports. Everybody shows up and they tell what they did and try to look good to each other, look good to the boss, and at the end of the day, the truth never comes out. I think we should just put news reports on Slack or someplace and read them and just have meetings where you can make decisions and solve problems. So I think people need to bring problems to meetings. And we need to train them to do that.
So do we stop calling them meetings and start calling them problems?
Yeah, all right. Problem solving meetings. I tell CEOs, it's like if you're having a news report, that's a waste of a meeting. It's like if people don't feel comfortable or safe enough to tell you what's not working, given the fact that every plan is going to be off course, you should say that. It's like, look, if everybody tells me everything's on course, somebody's lying or we're not playing hard enough. So let's use these meetings to solve problems. So who's off course? Who feels like they need help? And I think it's a whole different cultural shift when people can come to the table and help each other and be honest to surface what's really going on. Acceleration occurs in those meetings and in those companies. And so adaptation should be a cultural element. It shouldn't be, everybody looking good and hiding out, when there are problems. So it's a dramatic culture. When we've been able to bring that into companies, it just turns everything on. And the employees never want to go back. I mean, because they are now in the game. And so when you see that, that's what good leaders do. They're allowing people to fail, to learn, and to grow. They're not expecting everything to show up fine. And I don't care whether you're coaching a football team or a Fortune 500 company or a startup. It doesn't matter. It's that engagement that's important.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you gotta that engagement is everything. It makes the difference. I think in small companies when a leader is able to allow their team or their employees to kind of make some mistakes, to learn from their failures, and then have that culture of it's okay, like this is part of the deal. I know I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and they have a hard time letting go of some of the responsibilities because their name's on the billboard, right? Their name's on the office building, and that you kind of spoke about it earlier. They got to kind of release the ego a little bit to allow for people to come in and learn the process, to improve the process, but it kind of requires those mistakes at the same time. Let me ask you about Saga Leadership. When people come to you, what kind of organizations are you working with? Small little businesses, or startups? You looking for a particular demographic? What's it like to work with Saga Leadership?
Oh, we're kind of all over the place. My audience is, I mean, I'll do workshops or I'll do keynotes at conferences, and I get thousands of people. It's wonderful, all kinds of industries, all kind of sizes. I mean, we did everything from transform the U.S. Navy's fleet warfare readiness using these scientific methods we discovered by using anthropology and evolutionary genetics. But then we've also done startup companies. We've worked in different government areas. Yeah, it's all over the place. I like working with small to mid-sized companies though, because they can act pretty quickly. When they get an idea, the next morning something's happening. You don't have to like drive it through a political committee or try to get permission. So I've been enjoying working with entrepreneurs, and that's why my next book is really for entrepreneurs. The winners and losers book is what did I learn from 30,000 CEOs for entrepreneurs to drive results. And so I'm really fascinated by the entrepreneur market. I think that's my next area of focus.
Our conversation had a lot of kind of subtopics where military was involved. You talked a lot about samurais, what you learned from their training. We talked a little bit about the pilots and what they learned mentally from their training. I feel like there's something that happens when you have military training, and one of the things that I think a successful entrepreneur can take away from that are the standard operating procedures that they're taught in the military. Take a step, write it down. Take a step, write it down. And it makes a big difference, especially when you're trying to scale and grow a business. My brother came in after 8 years in the Navy to work in an insurance agency, and he'd never done insurance in his life. And one of the first things he was doing was writing out the SOPs for his processes. And now, he set it up so that he doesn't have to do much of the work anymore. He's retired himself out of that industry. But those SOPs make all the difference in the world. The standard operating procedures. When you work with leaders, how often do they have all the solutions for their entire business right here in their mind and very little on paper with some standard operating procedures? How important is it for them to have that written down to really operate their business from a leader's perspective in a way that grows the organization?
Well, I think it's important once you have a good strategy for winning, because there's like several levels of thinking. Obviously, at the top is strategic thinking. How are you going to out intuit the competition, not out analyze them? It's really been intuition, and that's why you see these small companies. Everybody says they're not going to make it. All the management experts say, "Oh, they're not going to make it." Then they grow and they dominate their industry because they were intuiting something that no one else saw. But once you have a good strategy, then you look at tactics. That's where you get analytical. That's where instead of looking out 5 or 10 years, you now start looking at what's the next year look like. What's our tactical plan? What do we do here? What do we do there? What's our budget? And then you get it into the day-to-day operations issues. And that's where then you need, good operating procedures so everybody knows what to do or how to do it and how it aligns with the tactical and strategic roles. And the reason I say that is because I've seen a lot of companies that were operationally excellent, but they're dead. And the reason they're dead is because their strategy was flawed. And there was a great quote, I forget where I heard it. And the only reason I look at the military is because I like doing studies over 5 or 10,000 years. And the industry that's been the most documented has been the military industry. So I use that. If it was another industry, I'd be using that one. But what's interesting is that this one general said you could execute very well, excellently in operations and tactics. You could be an excellent executor. But if your strategy is flawed, you're going to lose the war. However, if you've got a great strategy for winning, you can make any number of tactical or operational errors and still pull it off. And I think that's an interesting point. It's like sometimes we get stuck in thinking. Number one, yeah, you need to have good operating procedures, but you don't want to get stuck and let them run the company when your strategy needs to change. And when you look at that
Help me
company,
kind of break that down a little bit because that to me that's very interesting. The difference between the strategy and your operating procedures. I'm of the mindset that they were one and the same. How do you differentiate the two?
basically it's a level of complex thinking. I mean, the strategy around, hey, how am I get my company from where it is to where it should be in 5 years? That's a long-term level of thinking. I mean, the goals that you have are going to be out 3, 4, 5 years or more. Your metrics are going to be looking at these long-term patterns of thinking, and that's how you're going to know whether you're on course or off course. So operations, however, is more like, what am I doing right now? What's my day-to-day function, and how do I do that function so that I've got a clean operating system and it makes sense? It's almost like, if you're the captain of a ship and you need to go across the ocean to engage in or find a port or an island, you're looking at all kind of shifting conditions and winds and weather and currents, and you're trying to anticipate, that. But operationally, you're down below. You're polishing the cannons, you're keeping the powder dry, or worrying about, okay, food. You're worrying about, are the sales set right? Or, it's the more immediate things going on.
I like that. Then the immediate is definitely operational. The long term is more of the strategy, and we're kind of working the two together to get that long term squared away. That
Yeah.
does make sense. All right. Well, so if an organization has a good strategy in place and they're working on those operational procedures, how do you help them kind of line up their culture to kind of work all three together? Because I mean, you might have a good strategy, you might have a good operating procedure, and if the culture's not right, you're going to have a lot of turnover in that particular company.
Right.
So how do we match those three?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a colleague who just launched a great book on teaching people how to leave their jobs. And I thought, you know what? We need to start teaching business owners how to keep people. So I'm going to launch a new program called How to Keep Your Employees, to compete with all the consultants and coaches teaching people how to leave. So there's this battle going on. So I'm glad you brought that up. But I think how you get the culture aligned is you start with strategy. Like, what's the culture that's going to allow this strategy to become action, to become operational? And the reason I say that is, if you have a transactional company and your winning formula is going to be around a lot of volume, a lot of transacting very quickly, like an Amazon or something that's just, give me a transaction. What do you need? How fast? Bum, bum, bum. That's a different culture than a culture that's more of one that's around differentiation, like, engaging the customer in the community, engaging them in a more of a non-transactional environment, more of an experiential area. And you don't want to mix them up, because you take a transactional salesperson who's just answering the phones, and now you're saying, oh, now you're going to be a consultative salesperson. They're going to totally fail. It's a total different set of skills, a total different culture. Some companies transactional, there's not a lot of good customer service. There's enough, as opposed to you're going to have.
Yeah, it's tough. It's very, very tough when you're successful in the transaction aspect, right? Like on the one hand, the revenue coming in from the transactions it's what's going to make or break your company. But for the long term, I can understand why you need to have a lot more set in place than just the transactions. The transactions a good way to start, but the culture is what's really going to make that company thrive, which is one of the reasons why ultimately you end up studying the military, because they're the ones who stick around. Obviously, they're doing something right because they tend to last years over years over years, versus businesses where eventually something changes. They don't seem to roll with times. Companies don't seem to last as long as some of these dynasties. Although, I guess just times change. I don't know what the reason for that is. Maybe we used to right on a rock, and now we literally are talking on a screen. So things change over time. All right, Don, we're running low on time. I want to make sure that you let people know how, if they want to work with you, if they want to get a copy of your book, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. Well, I'm on Amazon and everywhere. So if you just type my name in, you'll get something. It's a weird name. It's Schmincke. But that's where you can look. But my website is sagaleadership.com. It's probably the bottom of the screen there. And that's where we're going to keep putting in, the new books, the new research. And for those who are looking at how to expose more of like the myths of leadership, I think there's a free download there for everybody to get on how to tell whether an author or someone is really dealing with relevant work versus just some sort of fashion trendy theory. And we're going to dig deeper into that with winners and losers. So that's a good place to start. Or if you want to shoot me an email, you can just don@sagaleadership.com.
Don, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, look, leadership is what's going to help your company either succeed or not. You are in charge. You are either the solopreneur starting to build a team, or you have an organization under you and you're struggling with maybe a little bit too much turnover. You're trying to figure out, how do I keep my people? Don is one of those people you want to reach out to. His email is don@sagaleadership.com. You can find more information on him at sagaleadership.com. Don, thank you very much for coming on the show today, sharing a lot of insight. And again, check out those books, Winners and Losers. We need to learn how to lose, ladies and gentlemen. I forgot who said it, but it's like working out. It's literally control the failure. You get your body to that point where it needs to fail, and then it makes the adjustment. And it works the same way with your mind. It works the same way with your business. You need to learn to lose a little bit and learn from those mistakes. Don's helping you guys do that. So one more time, sagaleadership.com, sagaleadership.com. Don, thank you very much for being on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. And we're out.
It's over. Go home. Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast. But not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbro